Welcome back to Pop Goes the Stack, where emerging tech gets a health check and usually fails compliance. I'm Lori MacVittie, clipboard in hand, sarcasm fully enabled. Like that's a surprise. We got Joel again, which is awesome. He's sure to
Hey,
bring some
Lori.
interesting
Yeah,
commentary. See, right there. He just
sure. Yeah,
started.
ready to roll for initiative, Lori.
All right. Hey, I always win. I can. All right. Uh, we also have Bill Church as a guest today, and I'm sure he is excited about our topic,
So
which
excited.
is, yeah, all about agents, right? AI and agents, because what isn't about agents these days? And they're popping up everywhere. They're tiny, disposable workers. They're spinning up to fetch data, call on APIs, or rewrite config files. And then they die off like digital mayflies. That's good. And yet we keep trying to shove them into human identity systems built for people with job titles and quarterly reviews and all that goes along with that, right? But when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what we've got. IAM, identity, and access management. Sometimes there's a D in there, right? For identity. It's IDAM or IAM. I, I
I
don't
don't
know.
I
It's
don't keep track of acronyms anymore.
okay.
I
Well,
just
that's
I just make them up.
I guess. Well, it's not going to work. I mean, that's whatever we want to call it,
Yeah.
right? It's a traditional security model. Agents are breaking that, and traditional credentials, traditional authorization, authentication, how we do it, tying it to identity, not working with something that might live like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, might live for 2 days. We're not sure. So let's talk about it. Like it's broken.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about this bill, but here's my take on it. I don't think IAM is designed for the world of AI. It wasn't birthed there. It is intended to be used in a direct user scenario. When agents come into the picture, they automatically unhook from a sense of a timeline or a session, and things can be initiated ad hoc and outside of your view. And that creates real pressure on IAM systems that exist today. I think that there's definitely a need to do something better here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've always was terrified of this concept. I mean, I've seen Terminator. I've watched the movies. The idea that we're gonna, in one hand, it's great. It frees me up from doing maybe tedious tasks, and I love that idea, and I have done that. On the other hand, I'm giving pretty much at this point today unfettered access to something to act on my behalf, and you know I love convenience, but I also love not going to jail. Those are two things that, because I mean, there's your, two ends of the spectrum, right? Because this thing could literally do anything as you, if you give it the credentials or you give it the context to do what you want it to do. So, as you said, IAM in its current form isn't structured to handle these types of agents.
Yeah, I think IAM is structured around human convenience and human timelines, and so we like to log into a system and have it generate a nice JOT token for us that hangs around inside our mobile application, so that when we pop that mobile application open again, it will automatically create a session with the application for us. And when I'm thinking about the ramifications of that, I'm imbuing an agent to do something on my behalf, but what I'm doing is I'm effectively giving it unfettered access to create any session it likes with any length of time behind that session. So it's a little bit like just creating sessions ad hoc that hang around. And I can see, because I'm not directly in front of the system's doing this on my behalf, I'm hoping no one's inside that system taking those sessions. That's what I'm particularly worried about, the idea that this is unhooked from my view and now it's happening on the background and it's creating as many sessions as it needs, all of which could be subject to being hacked by somebody.
Well, it's also, and we kind of chatted about this when we were prepping, right, and talking over this subject. MCP, right? They're connecting to other systems, and we kind of know that, we expect that, we set it up so they can do that. But they can also write their own code and go execute things that we never expected them to. So now we have like that problem that we have to deal with. And what's the, the mechanism there when they suddenly just start going off the rails? We don't know.
Yeah, I would say that is my major concern, is the idea that I'm not exactly worried. I am worried, but I'm not worried about the agent itself doing something wrong. It's more of that person in the middle intercepting those connections, and the idea that those are still today long-lived tokens. Typically, when we are dealing with other web applications or something else, all it takes is one person to be in the right place. It could be upstream at the provider or the SaaS provider you're using, or it could be on your workstation, and taking that and doing what they always do with it. All the bad stuff they do.
When I see some people today, there's multiple solutions, and we'll talk about one maybe in a minute, but one approach has been a lot of people saying, hey, we're just going to use certs. And I thought, wow, we have problems today rotating, renewing, that's a management issue in and of itself today. And then we're going to add all these agents and we're going to do it in real time. That's not going to scale. And that's going to make people quit. I mean, they're just going to be like, all right, I'm done. It's enough, because it's crazy.
Yeah, there's definitely room for something better here. And, Bill, as you probably, or you may or may not know, I'm a huge fan of like ephemeral credentials, especially those that are used to do a single task and then get out of the way. And we're posting a kind of a link to an Arxiv article on this. There's something that came out of a project called Nanda. Nanda is out of the MIT Media Lab, and it is the Internet of AI agents. So just now, instead of IoT, we're going to have to talk about the IOAIA.
I need a moment. I need a moment.
Yeah. So they have a proposal about creating a new zero trust mechanism for agents to authenticate themselves to downstream services with an identity, and also being able to validate the identity of the service that they are connecting to. All of which is being done using ephemeral credentials, meaning they are one shot. They're good for the job and nothing else. What do you think about that?
I'm a huge fan, honestly. So I have worked on something like this in the past, and my use case is a little different, but we had this situation where we had trust issues with a resource, and it could be either the resource or the accessor that we had the trust issues with. And at the time, we were dealing with a lot of legacy systems, and so it's kind of like almost an inverse problem, right? Where we had systems that could only work with username and password, but we had people who were authenticating with modern authentication methods. And what we did in that case was use ephemeral credentials in the same vein of, we have a tuple of, we have a user, we have a resource they want to access, and we have a credential we generate. We do that real time, send it off to that resource. That resource then actually comes back to the authentication system to validate that. And if any one of those three things don't meet up, either be the client IP or the user or the context or what they're trying to reach, we reject that connection. So I kind of see this as a similar method of handling those ephemeral agents, right? It's right there on the can.
It's right there.
But I think it's a great way to do that, because the idea is that this using session tokens that we've just been doing forever on web systems and applications, it doesn't work. I mean, it works too well, right? That's kind of the problem. As soon as somebody grabs that that token, it's off to the races with what I really want to do. So I love the ephemeral nature of that paper. It seemed very familiar to me, and yeah. So that's what else did you pull off?
Yeah, well, one of the things I noticed in the paper, and also think this is important, is that these systems, because they're acting on behalf of a user who's not sitting in front of a keyboard, maybe right then, maybe they embodied it to do something over a timeline, and it's just going off and doing what it needs to do based on original instructions. The ephemeral authentication token actually knows what the agent is doing and why on behalf of the requester, not just who is the requester, which I think is also important, although it's a little unclear to me how to enforce things by context. But I think the idea of including a little additional context of why you're accessing the service is an important aspect of security.
Well, if for no other reason than audit logs and knowing who, what, where, right? You answer the basic
Yeah.
questions. And you're right. I mean, that kind of context and like what's the task, who's the agent on behalf of, all of those kind of things are carried along in the context or should be. Mechanisms exist for it. Whether people actually use it properly, right, is another matter. But let's assume that they do because they're good. They want it to work. That's another piece of the security puzzle, right? The existing infrastructure is not set up to deal with something like policy in the payload. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't go there. We use other things. So it's another piece of the puzzle that has to shift in order to better secure, right, access into very sensitive things sometimes, right?
Yeah, actually, one of the things I was thinking about here was, this kind of dovetails into, definitely the idea is zero trust for sure. But I was thinking about how could you apply something like Spiffy and Spire to this type of
Mm,
solution?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, Spiffy and Spire, of course, identify workloads
Yeah.
and then control the ability to grant new workload identities. And I think that you still kind of need a structure like that to identify, say, an application to an MCP server, and maybe even an MCP server to its downstream services. And there are things that are emerging that are working a little bit like that. I look at the project called Waset that Microsoft is stewarding, which creates an MCP server that has pluggable functions written in WebAssembly that cast down into capabilities that the service
mm,
has towards the
nice.
systems that it connects to, and that's definitely a step in that direction, and would make huge use of a workload identity. But I think that this is a little deeper than that. This is something that rides underneath and is a request. It's a transactional authentication and authorization system, and it's being done on behalf of a user, and it has the need to have a very ephemeral, a moment in time, a snapshot in time with context attached to it. There's a concept in security called scope tunneling that I think is really applicable
Mm.
here, where everyone talks about you always want to abide by the principle of least privilege, but I think AI systems have a duty to go a little deeper than that. It has to be the least privilege in the moment. So narrowing down the access not just by role, but by action within the role,
Mm.
which I think is these systems are going to have to grow to that point. To Nanda's credit, they seem to be thinking about this at least, and so incorporating things about context-aware scoping within the protocol an important step. Now, how all this is governed, that's I think
You said the word.
I think that's going to be a real puzzle for
Mm.
us.
And
Oh
for
yeah,
that reason, I'm out.
yeah. He's like, that's it. I'm I'm done, right? I mean, I know, and I see people suggesting things like registries again for like tools, right? These tools are allowed, right? And then being able to clamp down at the MCP level in order to prevent at least that level of access. Like
Yeah.
that's we could do that today pretty much. I feel like that's not that hard, and it's something we should probably doing. Like you shouldn't have access to anything,
Yeah.
right? Or you design your MCP a different way so that it's very restrictive. But that's not rocket science. It's really when you go beyond that and you're trying to match all of these different types of authentication, top types of authorization. The the scenario you brought up, right? A more modern token from an agent, like Joel described, is
Right.
now might trying to access a more traditional system again on the back end through MCP, right? How do we deal with that? Is ephemeral again? Is that another? How do we do this? It's a big mess.
Yeah. When I see new proposals for new functionality that's built on top of authentication and authorization, there's always cryptography underneath it. And when you're talking ephemeral credentials, you're talking about not creating tokens that live around a while, You're creating tokens that are in the moment, and that means you're creating more tokens. And more tokens with cryptography means more latency. It means more churn within the credential. So these systems are going to have to handle massive token issuance and massive expiration rates. It's going to be I foresee as part of this approach a real challenge. Do you see any other challenges in this approach, Bill?
Well, the crypto piece is a concern, because I think about right now with our current approaches of post quantum and how large some of those the certificates are, and if we're talking about doing certificates for some of this stuff, that it'll be 10 times the request size, right, for
Right.
just a certificate. So there we have to figure that out, because right now, at least in the United States, the current ephemeral or the current PQC proposals are gross.
Yeah.
I'll just say that they're just gross. Like, it's what we have, but so that's my concern, is the latencies that absolutely go up. Now, for some of these things, it probably doesn't matter, because it's an agent, it's going off and doing its thing. You're having fun
Point in
somewhere
time.
else, and maybe it doesn't matter. But I'm an engineer. I don't like inefficiency, so that would bother me, personally.
Yeah.
But maybe I shouldn't take it personal.
You know what I do think matters, and one of the things we'll also have to contend with is how do you debug a system with short-lived credentials? Extremely, in some cases, short-lived credentials. You're creating something that is used for one purpose, one job, one connection only. What happens if something fails mid-task? How do you actually debug systems for whom you are granting scope instantaneously? That's an interesting area to study.
Yeah, it's we're like collisions, which is kind of what I wanted to mention, right?
We mean to do that.
Retransmit. That whole notion of massive scale and the unknown, right? Trying to handle all those tokens and then regenerate them, but the possibility of getting issued a token that somebody just used that has is that possible, or is that something that just blows the system up even bigger in order to prevent kind of that almost collision of, oh, it's not actually expired, or I'm going to reuse it, and some system cached something somewhere it shouldn't and says, oh, you can do whatever you want.
Right. So one thing I'm thinking about is how do these systems actually grow and improve in the future? So if you think about how you authorize access for another service today, if you think about how you authenticate to something from another service and it wants to use services that are generated, there's with OpenID, for example, there's a negotiation that takes place. It says, okay, I'm authenticating and you can use information within my service for these particular purposes, and then you have to click allow or deny. I mean, all of us have seen things like that. Now, what you're doing is you're essentially creating a long-lived mapping between the application and that particular service for those particular scopes. Now, the trouble here is scopes change over time. What an application or service does might add or remove certain things from all granted scopes. And so they'll change. They'll have different things. Now, how does an agent recognize that the service scope has changed? Great question. At the moment, I don't think it does.
Are you going to answer the question?
No, so I foresee that systems like this in the future are probably going to have to negotiate scopes between agents and the systems that are using the agents. Meaning, I was granted the rights to do this, that, and the other. Now the user is asking me to do things that require additional scopes, so I'm going to communicate back with the system to see if the user will allow me additional scopes. And there will be some sort of negotiation process that has to occur to unlock additional things. And that will have to be based on short-lived tokens and strong identity typing. I can't see any other way around that.
So the teenagers have to phone home to ask if they can go to a different friend's house.
Dad, can I use the car?
Right.
I mean, that eventually the agents are going to have to get smart enough to know when to communicate back to receive additional grants.
It's going to be slow. It's going to be slow, and it's going to be a mess.
Well, and then I think about too. So, I'm a user as well. So, and I know, but yeah, weird. But I think about I hate approving stuff all the time. Well, look, I am a security person, but also sometimes I just want it to work. I don't want to have to think about it. So I could see how this would be a big user acceptance issue, or could be, right, if it's not implemented correctly. And I think we were talking about earlier about failing fast with authentication, right? Where right now with MCP, authentication is kind of the Wild West, and the Silicon Valley idea of like, hey, when we want to fail fast with authentication, that's not a thing we want to really play around with, right? We want to kind of get that right, sort of the first time, but it never ever works that way. But
yeah. Well, and sadly, I don't think we're going to solve it. Although we were so close, we were right there.
Felt right.
It felt right, but we should still. It's still an important topic, and there are things that I think people should think about as they're putting agents in and MCP and all of these systems that they should at least be thinking about seriously, so they don't get bitten, right, when something goes wrong. So what would you want them to be thinking about as they're starting to deploy agents?
Yeah, I that's a great takeaway, I think, Lori. And the thing I'm taking away from this is kind of incorporated in that description of hey, Dad, I need the car. It's helpful kind of to think about these systems as granting the rights to a teenager. And over time, the teenager's needs will change. And over time, your desire to grant things to that teenager may change. And you need to develop a way to change those scopes by context over time. And I think this technology will eventually have to incorporate systems that work like that.
I like that, and I like the idea of it's a little confusing, when you think about it, because I used to be so rigid in the way I created policies, right? It was a very simple branch, a couple ors and here or there with natural language, which is basically what we're dealing with here. How weird could you describe this problem, and how do you account for that? So when those roles do change, or those scopes change, how do you do that? And to me, whenever I design systems or try to architect systems, I do try to think of that user interaction and how to make things easy. But we have to be careful about not making it so easy that people can get into trouble and over provision. Just give it root and it's fine. That type of mentality. We want to not do that. And I think this is an opportunity that we could probably reel some of that in, but we have to be careful.
Careful is good. And I think as people are deploying agents, right, the focus right now should probably be on like, how do you architect it to interact with other systems and think about what you need to secure, because a lot of the security tools that they will need don't exist yet.
That's right.
They're still coming. They're in papers, they're in people's heads, they're in POCs in different places. It's not here yet, and you don't want to architect a solution based on everything you have, because that's what you have, and then have to change it again. Just be aware and be flexible that the answers will come, just not today, not tomorrow. I'm guessing a few months at least, but probably a year or so before we see real solutions.
I agree. I think everybody should know right now that in terms of AI agent identity and IAM for AI agents, we're in roll your own mode territory right now. And so think about the ramifications of that before you launch a project.
I'm just going to vibe code it.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap. That is a wrap for Pop Goes the Stack. Keep your logs open, your sarcasm sharp, and don't forget to subscribe, because we'll be back with more glorious nonsense soon.